Welcome back. We've been talking about the Second World War. We did a little introduction, talked about theaters of war, and we talked about revisionist and status quo powers. I think I talked briefly about Hitler's overarching aims, and we'll get into that in a moment. We talked about leadership groups of the great powers that are going to engage in this war. In this lecture, I want to talk about Hitler's diplomacy. I'm going to take you step by step through Hitler's diplomatic moves that are going to trigger the Second World War, which will begin in early September 1939. Let me reiterate what I said about Hitler's overarching aims. He intends to reverse the outcome of the First World War. He wants to put Germany back on top. He intends to destroy the Jewish population of Europe. He intends to dominate Europe. He also intends to destroy the Soviet Union and to essentially colonize the western and southern portions, southwestern portions of Russia, Ukraine, to colonize that with German farmers. So keep these big goals in mind as we go through Hitler's diplomacy here. First, I think it's fair to say that the Versailles Treaty that Hitler intends to tear up and throw in the wastebasket, this treaty is terribly flawed. It creates a situation whereby, for the treaty to succeed, Germany is going to have to police herself. And of course, through most of the 1920s, Germany essentially does police herself. But now with Hitler in power, you'll see that policy go by the wayside. Hitler begins to violate the Versailles Treaty fairly quickly by initiating larger army and air force. The German military institutions have been limited by Versailles. I believe their army was limited to 100,000 men. And there are limitations on all aspects of German military institutions. Hitler's going to begin surreptitiously violating these restrictions and then more brazenly and openly violating them as we get deeper into the 1930s. In 1936, Hitler and Mussolini, the leader of Italy, are going to sign what's called the Pact of Steel. This is a military alliance between Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy, sometimes referred to as the Axis. This realigns European politics to a degree. Earlier, there had been some competition between Germany and Italy, and now there's a military alliance between the two. You get the sense that Mussolini is hitching his wagon, perhaps, to Hitler's Nazi Germany. I think perhaps Mussolini can see that Germany will inevitably become the more powerful state. The remilitarization of the Rhineland. This is in March of 36. The Rhineland, of course, was that area in West Germany adjacent to the Rhine River that the French had insisted on being demilitarized at Versailles. This essentially pushed the Germans back a couple of hundred miles so that if indeed they ever decided to attack France again, they would take them longer to do so and give the French more warning time. In 36, Hitler violates this stipulation of the Versailles Treaty. He marches the German army back into the Rhineland. Now, this is significant for a couple of reasons. First, the German generals were terrified of this and tried to dissuade Hitler from doing it. He did it anyway, and he got away with it. The Allies protested, but they didn't do anything. They didn't do anything about it, except complain. So what this does, it increases Hitler's confidence in his own judgment. It lowers the esteem of the Western democracies in Hitler's eyes. It also increases Hitler's generals' confidence in the Führer's judgment. He got away with it this time. Perhaps Hitler knows what he's doing. Perhaps we should follow him. So this is a key moment, the demilitarization of the Rhineland. And then Of course, in 1937, we have the Anschluss. Anschluss, German for union. That is, it refers to Austria becoming part of Hitler's Third Reich. Austria, of course, is a German-speaking country. Hitler himself is Austrian. He longed to bring the German-speaking peoples together in one great German empire. And so this is part of his process. There's a plebiscite, essentially, for the Austrian people to vote yes or no on a question: should Austria join the Nazi Third Reich? And the answer was overwhelmingly yes. Now, this breaks the Versailles Treaty again, but still the Western Allies do nothing more than complain. So suddenly, Nazi Germany has become quite a bit larger. And ironically, it has incorporated many European Jews into the Reich. Following the Anschluss is, of course, the Munich Crisis. One of the new, small, weak countries created by Versailles, you remember self-determination, all these little European ethnic or language groups are going to get their own countries. Czechoslovakia is one of these. It's created by Versailles. And you'll notice on the map here that there's an area around the western rim of Czechoslovakia, adjacent to Germany. It's called the Sudetenland. And in this Sudetenland, there are many Germans. The German population is quite large there. And Hitler very cleverly uses this notion, Woodrow Wilson's notion of self-determination. He wants that Sudetenland now to become part of Greater Germany. Self-determination. The Rhineland is part of Germany. We should be able to do with it as we wish. So he marches his army into the Rhineland. Austria is a German-speaking country. These Germans should be allowed to join the Third Reich if they wish, and they did. So again, self-determination. The Sudetenland's full of Germans. They want to join the Third Reich. They should have the opportunity to do so. Well, the Czechoslovakians absolutely refuse and are prepared to fight to prevent Hitler from gobbling up this territory. Now, Czechoslovakia has supposedly has allies in France and then perhaps even Great Britain. But the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, who we talked about earlier, is determined not to go to war with Germany again. Having lived through the disaster of the First World War, he has no desire to repeat this. So, Chamberlain's policy of appeasement is designed to prevent a Second World War with Germany. And he looks at a map of Europe, he sees the Sudetenland, and he's aghast that he might be asked to go to war over an obscure piece of real estate that most people couldn't even find on a map. And he's determined to avoid this. So the Munich Crisis occurs in September of 38. Here at Munich in southern Germany, Hitler and Mussolini gather with Chamberlain, the British Prime Minister, and Daladier, the French President. They gather here at Munich, and the Western Allies, the British and the French, force the Czechoslovakians to surrender the Sudetenland, their territory, to surrender it to Nazi Germany. So appeasement has apparently worked here. It's prevented war, and that's Chamberlain's overarching goal. All it's cost is Czechoslovakia some territory and some population, at least on the surface. There's famous pictures here. You can see one of Chamberlain arriving back in London. He's on the tarmac here. He's gotten off the plane. You see the world press is gathered there. You see all the microphones. And you can see Chamberlain waving this paper in his hand. What he has here is Hitler's signature that this is his last territorial demand in Europe. In other words, Hitler's shopping list is complete. So, given this assurance, Chamberlain is quite pleased with himself. You can see the smile on his face. He believes that his policy of appeasement has succeeded and that war has been averted. So, this is a high watermark in Hitler's diplomacy. We can look back now and see that Hitler was in fact disappointed with this result. He preferred war against Czechoslovakia. But once the British and the French forced Czechoslovakia to surrender this territory without war, there was no avoiding that. So Chamberlain's very pleased with himself. On the one hand, the French, of course, are relieved. They don't want to fight Germany again. The Czechoslovakians are incensed that they've been forced to dismember their country. And Hitler, of course, has not exhausted his shopping list. There are other things in Europe that he wants. And in our next lecture, we'll turn to Poland and the Non-Aggression Pact. Thank you.